Welcome on into today's video where I want to talk about this hypothetical 2020 presidential election matchup between Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side, Donald Trump on the Republican side, and how this might play out, why it looks so good for Bernie Sanders, at least at this point in time. We're going to look at the favorable, unfavorable numbers of both of these politicians, which is very telling. And also, you get a good sense of the name recognition that a particular candidate has based on those favorable, unfavorable numbers. When you add them together, the closer they get to 100%, the better that politician is known throughout the United States. So that's something that certainly helps a candidate like Bernie Sanders in going up against Donald Trump in comparison to some of these other potential Democratic candidates like Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and other candidates like that. But we're also going to take a look at the Cook Political Report and how they project the Electoral College with these states and divvying out first and foremost, the solid Democrat and likely Democratic states to Bernie Sanders, and then doing the same with Trump with the likely Republican and solid Republican states, and then talking through some of the toss-up states, and then also the ones that lean Democrat and lean Republican that are typically a bit more competitive. So starting off here, I just want to look at the favorable, unfavorable numbers of these two politicians. So we're going to bring that up on the screen. And I have this over from Real Clear Politics, and you can see all of these favorable, unfavorable polls from the most recent numbers for Bernie Sanders. As you can see, they're extremely impressive. He's consistently one of the most popular politicians in the United States. And when you add up his favorable, unfavorable numbers, you approach right around a 90% clip, which is actually pretty similar to what we're going to see once we flip over and look at Donald Trump's numbers. But typically, Bernie, he finds himself in about the 50 to 60% range on the favorable side, and then usually somewhere in about the 30s on the unfavorable side. So extremely popular. You don't see any candidate polling this well in general across the spectrum here like Bernie Sanders is able to do. And that's because he has great reach, not just among Democrats, but he also does extremely well amongst independents, which is a really big difference maker, the fact that he's the independent senator from the state of Vermont. And then he also actually does a little bit better amongst Republicans than your typical Democratic candidate might do, particularly for someone like a Hillary Clinton, who did really bad, not just amongst Republicans, but also amongst those independent voters. So now we're going to take a look at Donald Trump's favorable, unfavorable numbers. And as you can see here, when you add his favorable, unfavorables up, you get right at around that 90% range as well, which goes to show you that Trump and Bernie, they have a similar amount of name recognition across the United States, which is very helpful when you're trying to challenge going against an incumbent president. So you look at his numbers, not the greatest by any means. His favorable numbers have been getting a little bit better, it seems, more recently, but still not looking great with an average here of about negative 12.5 point spread. When you're in the lower 40s, upper 30s, and that kind of range, that usually signals what's going to be a Democratic wave here in the upcoming 2018 midterm elections, and then depending on how this continues to go, likely going to be a negative factor for Trump going in to his re-election campaign in 2020. So now that we looked at those favorable, unfavorable numbers, you can see already that Bernie Sanders has a great advantage coming into this hypothetical matchup. But not only his favorable numbers, but looking at the Cook Political Report and the Electoral College voting ratings, it's just an inherent advantage that any Democrat has going into an election against a Republican. Based on how these states and the Electoral College plays out, really the only way a Democrat can lose at this point in time is if they have a really bad candidate, and apparently that was the case in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. But starting off here, I'm going to go through, give Bernie Sanders all of the solid Democratic and likely Democratic states. So starting off here with California, and then Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Illinois, and then Maine is a little bit different. They split things up amongst their congressional districts. So for this one, that's going to be the Maine 1st Congressional District. So we'll give that over to Bernie. And then moving on down here, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, And then wrapping up the solid Democrat states are going to be Vermont and Washington. And then that already gives him 183 Electoral College votes. You need 270 to win the presidency. So we're also going to be giving him the likely Democratic results, and that's going to be the Maine 2nd congressional district here. Or excuse me, it's going to be the Maine 2-1. The 2nd congressional district in Maine is going to be in a different category. So then moving on here to Minnesota, New Mexico, and Virginia, which is continuing to become a more blue state as we go through the year. So that already puts Bernie Sanders up to 213 electoral votes, very much so within striking distance. So now we're going to go over and give Donald Trump the likely Republican and solid Republican results here. So we're going to start off with the solid Republican and go Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho and Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana. And actually, interestingly, in a head-to-head matchup between Trump and Bernie Sanders, I actually think Bernie can do pretty well and competitive in states like Kentucky and West Virginia in this pocket of the country. His message definitely would speak to these types of voters, that populist message that Hillary Clinton wasn't able to have any success with on the more corporate free trade side, where Trump, he campaigned as a populist, which allowed him to run up some pretty big margins in these states. But moving on here, after Kentucky and Louisiana, we have Mississippi and Montana, Nebraska, and then the 1st and 3rd congressional districts in Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And actually, a lot of these states that are in the solid Republican going into the 2016 election, I would actually expect to probably be more in a lean Republican or likely Republican scenario if it was Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump. Probably a bit more competitive results in a number of these states, especially a lot of these states where Bernie Sanders did tremendously well back during the 2016 Democratic primary, for instance. But now moving up to the likely Republican results, and that's going to be Alaska, Indiana, and again, going into 2016, you had that Mike Pence factor, which made Indiana a likely Republican, and that would probably also likely be the case if Pence were to be vice president again going into 2020. Missouri, another state that I actually would expect to be quite a bit more competitive between Sanders and Trump. We've seen Missouri be close in elections in the past. For instance, the 2008 presidential election, Obama lost it by, I believe, less than 1 percentage point, but in this one, it was an absolute blowout for Donald Trump against a very flawed candidate in Hillary Clinton. Moving on, South Carolina, as well as Texas. And Texas is another one of those states that's trending in a more Democratic direction. Probably going to be going within the next about 10 years into a more purple scenario, and then past that, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But still, at this point, we're going to be giving that over in the likely Republican scenario. So this, again, guys, was the numbers from the Cook Political Report going into the 2016 general election. It's obviously going to be a bit different going into 2020, but just for the purposes of this video, I wanted to paint a picture of how this map might play out between these two candidates with somebody like Bernie Sanders, who's much more favorable than a challenger like Hillary Clinton, and also somebody like Sanders, whose message of populism can help him in key states that Hillary Clinton lost, and which is why she ended up losing this election. So now we're going to move over to the lean Republican results. And the reason Utah was in this weird scenario going into 2016 was because of Evan McMullin and his candidacy. But obviously, in general, this is going to be a pretty safe Republican state in a presidential election. And then we're also going to be giving Donald Trump Georgia. And let's see here, Arizona. And then I'm going to leave Ohio and Iowa, even Arizona, for instance, and Georgia, probably very competitive, especially more so Arizona. I could see Bernie Sanders flipping that one, but for the purposes of this video, states like Ohio and Iowa, Bernie Sanders would have a great shot at potentially grabbing against Donald Trump. These are states where Obama was able to win. So we know that Democrats can win these states. You just have to have the right candidate and the right message. And obviously Hillary Clinton wasn't able to have that going into 2016. But moving over to the lean Democratic results, and starting off here, Colorado, another state that's becoming more Democratic as the years go on. And then Michigan. That was a big one for Hillary Clinton. She lost it. Surprisingly, it was extremely close. And there's not a whole lot of love in big sections of the state of Michigan for somebody like a Hillary Clinton. That's why she ended up losing. She wasn't able to run up big enough margins in that Detroit metro area. But somebody like a Bernie who has that populist message to counteract Donald Trump easily, in my view anyways, would flip this back in the Democrats' direction. Especially in a presidential election, Michigan almost always goes for Democrats. It was just a special situation with Clinton going against Trump, but that populist message from Bernie definitely being a difference maker in a state like that. And then moving on to Nevada, again, a state that's trending in a more Democratic direction, would feel very safe giving that to Bernie. New Hampshire as well, up in the Northeast, kind of a no-brainer that he'd be able to pick up that state. And then Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Again, two states that Hillary Clinton went on to lose, but states that almost always go for Democrats in presidential elections. Two states that went for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. And again, it's that Midwestern vote, and somebody like a Bernie with that populist message, much like the state of Michigan, would likely push him over the line. You're talking about two states that were extremely competitive between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and that's with somebody like a Hillary Clinton whose message didn't resonate with these voters like you would see a Bernie Sanders type message doing. But we're definitely going to be giving Bernie Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in this scenario, and that puts him over the top at 278 electoral votes. But we're going to move through the rest of these results as well. So Florida, I actually wouldn't be completely surprised if Bernie Sanders went on to lose Florida to Donald Trump. Sanders didn't do all that well in the state of Florida in his 2016 Democratic primary. Still a state that's always very competitive. Obama was able to win it 2 times in a row, and then Trump flipping it in this past election. But just for the sake of this video and being probably overly optimistic to Donald Trump's side, we're going to be giving him the state of Florida as well. So moving on here, the Maine 2nd Congressional District and the Nebraska 2nd Congressional District. Now, I would be extremely surprised personally if Bernie Sanders wasn't able to grab the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Nebraska, but still nonetheless going to be giving it over to Trump. And then on the flip side of that, going to be giving Bernie Sanders that 2nd Congressional District over in Maine. And then we have North Carolina, another state where I'd probably expect Bernie Sanders to win. But again, we're being a bit optimistic on Donald Trump's side in this video, just to show you what kind of Herculean effort it would take on Trump's side to try to beat Bernie Sanders in this head-to-head matchup. And then Iowa and Ohio, two states where Obama was able to win. I would be very surprised if Sanders wasn't able to flip these two particular areas. His message of populism can definitely resonate and get that voter turnout. Also, Bernie Sanders, he does very well in states that have larger white populations. We saw that back in his 2016 primary bid on the Democrat side. So a state like Iowa, he's definitely able to get a lot of those types of voters as well. And again, it is worth noting that those favorability numbers for Trump and Bernie Sanders are just complete night and day. You have like a 30 to 40 point gap between the negative side of Trump to the positive side of Bernie Sanders on those. So in an actual election situation, so here we have 303 for Bernie Sanders, 235 for Donald Trump. And I actually think this is a very conservative estimate on Bernie Sanders' side. Wouldn't be surprised if he was also able to grab states like North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Missouri, and even some of these other states like Kentucky, West Virginia, even in Indiana. Definitely some of those results could possibly go over to Bernie Sanders' side as well. Maybe even some of these plain states where Bernie did extremely well in during his 2016 Democratic primary results, probably making a lot of those states more competitive as well. But again, guys, I just wanted to make a little bit of a video here about this hypothetical 2020 presidential matchup between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and why he would be such a better opponent to Trump in comparison to somebody like Hillary Clinton when you're looking at the key states that Hillary Clinton lost: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where that populist message was the difference maker on Donald Trump's side, where Bernie Sanders could counteract that if he ran on the Democratic ticket. So thanks, guys, for stopping on in. You can subscribe for more. Check out all of our political videos over on our YouTube channel. Give it a thumbs up on the video if you liked it, and place a comment down in the comment section if you have any colorful commentary of your own on this potential matchup. So thanks, guys, for stopping on in, and we hope to see you back here for future videos. Bye.